Hi guys, Courtney Whitley here with our final video presentation for Educational Research Methods class. Today my project is very near and dear to my heart. Currently, I teach 6th grade resource classes in Walton County, and I teach students with a variety of disabilities. I have students with orthopedic impairments, visual impairment, learning disabilities, emotional behavior disorders, autism, just a very wide variety. Our school system has 3 different placement strategies that we use. Students can be full inclusion with co-teaching, so the special ed teachers would come in with them into their regular setting. We do have the consultative, which is where they would just be in the regular setting all day without the special ed teacher's assistance, but we don't have any students currently in that placement. We have a resource classroom that can be utilized, but only for 2 classes per day. There's a resource language arts class and a resource math class. But all students who are in our special education program do go to regular education classes for science and social studies. If students are mild, moderate, or severe, there is self-contained placement for them. But any student with emotional behavior disorder, specific learning disability who is capable of participating will be in the inclusion setting, with the most restrictive environment being that they have 2 resource classes and 2 inclusion classes during the day. And the issue that I have had, we have had 6 students have to leave our school, leave the 6th grade actually. 2 of them are at the Psychoeducational Center in Rutland in Athens. And the other 4 went to the Walton Alternative Center, which is just 4 hours a day of schooling after regular school hours for those students who have left the regular school setting. And then actually 2 of the students who went to the Walton Alternative Center ended up getting expelled from the Walton Alternative Center as well. And now they are being taught by a private tutor. And we went through and did the manifestations and found that it wasn't a manifestation of the emotional behavior disorder. However, it was still a code of conduct issue that did lead them to be removed, with the exception of the 2 that went to Rutland, and theirs was a manifestation of their disability, which is why they got to go to Rutland. We had one student who moved, and his previous IEP had outlined that he would be in the self-contained EBD classroom, which we actually don't have that placement. So he was placed into our most restrictive environment, which was the 2 resource classes and the 2 inclusion classes. And it was a very short matter of time before the meltdown started. He started getting in fistfights and even tried to fight a teacher and did hit her. So he's now at Rutland as well. And, with all of these issues that we were having, what kept crossing my mind is, are we as the teachers doing enough for them? And if there was a different placement for them, if there was a self-contained EBD class, would they have gotten into the trouble and had the issues that they had, in the hallways or at lunch or during class exchange? Because if we would have had a self-contained class, that wouldn't have happened. But then, society as a whole has so many issues when it comes to placement, and everybody wants their child to be in inclusion. Well, a lot of people do, and there's such a push for inclusion right now. But is that really the best choice? So I'm going to open up my PowerPoint and begin to share my study with you. Okay, my study is called The Impact of Classroom Placement on Students with Emotional Behavior Disorder. Emotional behavior disorder is defined in the Federal Code of Regulations. As you can see, the definition has 5 different points. Emotional behavior disorder includes such a wide variety of issues that a student could be dealing with. The first one, the inability to maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationships. 2, the inability to learn, which cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or health factors. 3, the kinetic behavior or feeling under normal conditions. 4, the pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression. And then 5, the tendency to develop physical symptoms or pains or unreasonable fears. And so what are the options for classroom placement? I went over this just a little in my video introduction. Inclusion would be that they went into a classroom that had a special education teacher and a general education teacher who worked together to teach the general curriculum to all the students. There's a self-contained classroom in which the students would go into one classroom with a special education teacher and a parapro for the extent of the entire school day. And then there's a separate school option, which is typically the psychoeducational centers. And then, of course, there's a couple that I did not put on here that I'm not using in the study, which would be the consultative. Now, the introduction, which I went over with you guys just a little bit. Students with emotional behavior disorders can be placed in a variety of environments depending on the severity and the availability of the setting. Some of the questions is, how does classroom placement impact middle school students with emotional behavior disorders academically when it comes to their test scores, socially when it comes to their peer interactions, and emotionally when it comes to how they feel about themselves and their self-esteem, and do they have more meltdowns? Are they sad? Are they mad? How do they feel about where they're going to school and their placement? What is the difference in inclusion, resource, self-contained, and separate schools, and students' time on task? You know, I can't tell you how many times I've been in the classroom with a student who's having a complete and total meltdown, and the entire class is missing out on instruction due to the child's meltdown. So how does that impact the students when it comes to what setting that they are in? And how do they feel about their classroom placements according to their surveys? So research on the self-contained classroom setting in the last 5 years is definitely lacking. Most research on this classroom setting was done before the 90s, but is still mentioned in some of the more recent research. There are many gaps when it comes to how the placement impacts a student with emotional behavior disorder. Recently, there's been a major push for the inclusion classroom, which I had mentioned a little earlier, and that was found in a study by Reams and Bain in 2005. SAC conducted a case study that I found particularly interesting, and it looked at the curriculum, the parent attitudes, the teacher attitudes, and socialization of students who are in the self-contained setting. She actually began as a special education teacher, believing that inclusion was the best option for her students with disabilities. And when she pushed her students who had started out in the self-contained setting into the inclusion classroom, she found that her hypothesis was not correct. She was hoping that students would see an example of good behavior and help them to learn to socialize with their peers, but the experience caused major stress on her students and caused them to be unsuccessful academically. She states that inclusion is a stressful environment for students with emotional behavior disorder and can take a toll on their education. Another study was done in California, and Pennsylvania. They looked at the students who were in the self-contained placement in Pennsylvania and who were in the general education setting in California. And their data showed that in the general education setting in California, they had much higher rates of disruptive behavior and lower rates of academic engagement than the students who were in the self-contained placement in Pennsylvania. However, they were looking more so at the behavior and not the academics. Also, Mattson did a study only looking at students who were in the self-contained classroom and at the self-contained school. When it came to the testing, he found that the students at the self-contained school did have a lower test scores than those at the self-contained classroom. However, it was interesting that looking at the psychopathology, the students who were at the self-contained schools did show more growth, and that psychopathology is important when working with students with emotional behavior disorders. So when it comes to my study and trying to fill some of these gaps, we started out with the participants. I am from Gwinnett County, which is near Atlanta, Georgia, so I'm most familiar with their school system because I did teach there for 2 years, and that is the system that I grew up in. So for this study, I did use this systems, and the participants that I'm choosing to work with are middle school students with emotional behavior disorders. It's important that the participants not have any other special education eligibilities that could impact the research data. The students' ages will range from 11 to 15 years old and be in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade classes. I chose 6 schools because I felt that these schools provided a variety of different kind of students from different socioeconomic backgrounds, as well as different cultural backgrounds. North Metro is a special school for students with emotional behavior disorder. It's our psycho-ed center where students can get extra counseling and smaller classes, and the entire school is just for students with emotional behavior disorder in separate classrooms. Trickham Middle School is actually where I went to school. They house a lot of the different special education eligibilities. In Gwinnett County, sometimes they divide it up where some schools will have the orthopedic impairments, specialize in the visual impairments in order to give the students the most that they can. Five Forks Middle School is a higher end school as far as the students who go there financially are in better shape, same as McConnell Middle School. Burtmar Middle and Couch Middle School are both Title I schools, but all of these schools have academically done well and met AYP. So I separated them into 3 groups. Group 1 being students from a separate school, which is North Metro. One limitation to this study is that we only have 1 separate school to look at in Gwinnett County. So that would be listed as one limitation. Group 2 would be students who are served in a separate class. And group 3 would be those who are served in the inclusion setting. This is a mixed methods research study. So one of the instruments that I'm using for this study is a survey called How I Like My School. And it's a questionnaire that focuses on 3 areas: self-image, personal achievements, and the student's feelings about the school. The questionnaire will use a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being strongly agree and 1 being strongly disagree. And the students will complete this questionnaire 3 times, once at the beginning of the year, once at the middle of the year, and once at the end of the year. The questionnaire is just being created and will have to be piloted for reliability and validity. Some of the questions that would be on this survey would be, I am a good student. I like school. I enjoy my classes. My teacher likes me. And in the general vicinity. Another instrument will be collected by the State Department. The Georgia Milestones is a comprehensive summative assessment program that students in Georgia take at the end of their grade. It measures the knowledge and skills that are outlined in the state's adopted content standards in language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies. It contains open-ended items in language arts, mathematics. There's a writing component and a norm reference items in all content areas. The Georgia Department of Labor is currently testing the Georgia Milestones Assessment to ensure the validity and reliability of the source. The last instrument would be the researchers themselves and the observations that they're doing. The researchers will conduct observations at the schools once a week for 30-minute time intervals for the entire school year. They'll be looking for students' time on task. Time on task for this study will be defined as the time that the students are following directions and participating in his or her own learning. And then they will also look for students who are initiating peer and teacher interactions, as well as interactions with other adults. The study will take one academic year, with another limitation being that it's not a longitudinal study, and a longitudinal study may actually, reap more benefits for the educational field. The procedures: researchers will gain permission from the county first, then each individual school. Once that permission is granted, permission slips will be sent home with letters explaining the study with each student with emotional behavior disorder during the first week of school. If they are signed and returned, that's great. If they're not, researchers will call the parents and try to explain to them what it is and encourage them to sign the permission slip. But if they don't, that's their choice. And then once the permission is granted, students will complete their first set of questionnaires, and researchers will begin their observations. So what we will do to analyze the data will be to use descriptive statistics to look at the correlations between classroom placement, emotional profiles, behavioral profiles, and the academic profiles. The data that is collected from the surveys will be incorporated into a bivariate data table to look for correlations between the variables. And the data analysis will show how students who are in the different placement perceive their social interactions, how they achieve academically, and how they behave in the classroom. This study could help benefit the education field and help teachers to make good classroom placement choices for students, because it does impact their lives. It impacts how they feel about themselves. It impacts their test scores. And, I just think that the educational field really needs some research to back this up. Even though it sounds kind of like it would be common sense, we need the research to back up this information. And so I do think that this study would be beneficial to the educational field and teachers like me and you. Thank you for watching.